Hi everyone, now moving on to part 2 of our lesson. For more information on how to use Repellent to kind of do the simple functions, please refer to our first YouTube video on it called LP2 Functions Intro Part 1. All right, so now moving more into Python modules and functions. Taking you behind the scenes here, I've updated this a little bit because in going through Codecademy again, I found out that they use the %d versus %s. And so I wanted you to know why, right? And so this one here in lesson 3, call and response of Learn Python 2 functions. This is what a function called square does, and it prints out the square, right? So this is just a function. This isn't using any special math built-in operators or special operators that you would use importing a module. We'll talk about that in a second. But this one they're defining as squaring. So when you want to check something out, what do? Put in repellent. So here we go. So that one I'm going to swap out for this one, which we'll use a little bit later. So by swapping out, delete, paste, run. Okay, so there's a small part of Learn Python 2 that I didn't use. It's called square, right? So this is calling the square function and putting in 10. So when I go back to here, let's see if we get the same output. Square 10. Okay, 10 squared is 10. So here's our first use of %d. If you notice %d versus s, d stands for decimals, s stands for string. So the resources I found online show that, yes, it kind of makes sense. What's the difference between that is %d has to do with numbers or integers, and %s has to do with strings. So kind of makes sense. But we didn't get any errors or any mishaps when using this notation because clearly squared is not a number. So by using the % operator, we took care of all those errors that might happen when combining numbers and strings. So that's what it looks like when we call square and use the argument 10. So to run any function, you type in what you defined, and that's square. And if I wanted to square 5, 5 squared is 25, right? So if you notice, why are there 2 lines here? The 2 lines are because we printed this, so that's doing the 5 squared is 25. And then we also have this line number 5 here, this is return squared. So that's why you see 2 things. The programmers use return if we want to be able to use squared different or somewhere else. So this squared, what's cool about repellent, you highlight them, you see this squared variable everywhere, right? So it would still work if I turned this one off. Remember, I'm using the hashtag to be the Python comment. I run it, and let's do square 5 again. And we still have 5 squared is 25, right? But I turned off this part, which got rid of the second 25. So let's try not to bore you more than usual. Keep going, right? So this one's defining, kind of doing the same thing, but now using power, a new function called power, that takes in 2 arguments, base and exponent, kind of like how I did in our first video when I added 2 numbers. I like this one. Let's copy and paste again. Why not? Get rid of that, paste, and run. So if you notice, I don't have to type power 37.4 over here because it's already in the left-hand side. It's already in where the code is. So if I turn this one off, doesn't stop power function, or I should say the function called power, from working. So I did that, I turned it off, but if I want to use power, let's just do a number that we know, right? So let's do 2 and 3, should get the output of 8. 2 to the power of 3 is 8, and once again, we're using the %d operator to get a expected output. So moving on. So this one is, once again, using functions, using the return functions. Here's another one, right? So I really like this one for number 6. It's called defining a function called cube that takes an argument called number and returning that cube. So this is a lot of good practice in using functions. So here, copying and pasting into a palette again, select all, here we go, running. So here, if I use cube and 3, I get out that. But if I use by 3, and put in 8, I should get false. And why is that? Yes, the number is not divisible by 3. So remember, this operator we talked about earlier in use for printing, but that's also known as the remainder operator, which says if number, which we inputted here as 8, is divisible by 3, we want it just to return the cube number. So that means if it's divisible by 3, there is no remainder. So then that's why we return false. Does this false have to be capital? Yes. To actually count as false. If we return false, let's see what happens. So let's run. Let's do by 3. Let's do 6, which is just cube it, right? But let's do 7, right? And now we got an error. So here is the fundamental issue with computer science. Defined by 3 worked. There is nothing wrong with it if you gave it a number that was divisible by 3. As soon as we change something, right, and not capitalizing something made it wrong, then we got the error. So this is, sometimes a program works, sometimes it doesn't. That's why you have to have multiple ways of testing it. So it's actually really useful that Code Academy goes through all these different scenarios that you're testing stuff. So this kind of last part that I really get into in the questions here, what is a module, is really answered by 7 and on, right? So I've giving you some support here by looking into math functions, right? This is what the official Python code or support for math functions is. But basically, this import math is saying import math modules. So a module has a lot of extra functions that aren't built in, but you can make use of by importing it. So we either import everything, and then if you're using the square root function, you do math dot in front of it, or if you imported, well, I guess I'm going to go back. If we imported math everything, why don't we just do it here? So I do it here, let's just go back and try this line of code. So I'm going back in Repel it. When in doubt, you test it and Repel it. So I'm going to run it. Okay. So when I run it, I can do square root of 9. Okay. And that is the reason why this works, is because from math, I imported square root, as opposed to, how do I do this? Why don't we put in the hashtag? and move on and just do import math. Okay, so I'm going to run it. And now I'm going to do square root of 9 and see what happens. Guess what? Error. But if I did math dot square root, it works. So that's the difference between importing a single command versus importing all the commands and having to use this math dot to use it. Why may a function be helpful in programming? It's a great question. That's why I wrote it. And create and define a function called odds evens that has the input of a number and tells the user if the number is odd, even, or 0. So why don't I start that one for you real quick, odd evens. So this one, of course, going back to root palette. So odd evens, defining odd evens. And so it says, has the input of a number and tells the user if it's odd, even, or 0. Okay, so going back here. So let's call it number. Okay. So you're going to check to see if it's odd, even, or 0. If number equals equals, so if the number has a remainder of 0 when it's divided by 2, we want to call that. So that's a return or print. Copy and paste tells the user. So in this lesson, return or print. Return even. Okay, so let's see what happens. Always test your code on evens number. Oh. Okay, cool. I've done one part of it. Now what? And yeah, I'm not done yet. So remember, when you get into Code Academy a little bit more, we're going to see that things have the else, the if, the elif, and the else. So this is incredibly useful right here to be able to understand how more than one condition can be met. So here, remember backspacing. So let's see how this works. So I didn't have to erase all of this because I'm just using this. Okay, so let's run it again because why not? Shut down if S is yes. So here, let's do yes, assuming I can spell, and shutting down, right? So if S is yes, do this, elif this, do this, else, sorry. This is exactly the code that I wanted you to kind of copy for odds evens to have 3 scenarios. One if it's odd, one if it's even, and one if 0, right? So I've done the even. So now I need you to do an elif and an else for those other 2 conditions. So how do you check to see if it's odd? How do you check to see if it's even? And then how do you check to see if it's 0? So good luck. We'll definitely have office hours this week. And keep up the good work.